Thank you guys for coming. I'm really excited to be here, and we're going to talk about workplace alternatives. We often call this harder working spaces at Steelcase. And one of the things that Steelcase does is manufacture office interiors, walls, and furniture for a lot of different organizations. So in order to know what the best products are for those organizations, we have a research group that goes out and looks at trends going on in the workplace. With that, we've added in information from secondary sources that you're going to see cited along this presentation as we go forward. The way we're going to set this up is we're going to start with the world, talking about some of the issues facing the world, very macro, and then we're going to go into how those issues face different organizations, how that affects work, the workers, and workplace. Now, we all know we're living in a networked world, right? You're going to see a couple of slides coming up here. This is a few slides that came out of Shift Happens. Are you guys familiar with that? Have you ever seen that? From Carl Fish and Dr. Scott McCloud. And so we'll take some time and just go through this, some perspective of what's going on in the world. So as I said, that was put together by Dr. Scott McCloud, who's with the University of Iowa, and Carl Fish, who happens to be the director of mathematics at a high school here in Colorado, at Arapahoe High School. They put the first one together in 1995 and posted it on the internet, and it has since gone viral. You could say it's its own cottage industry. There is one on healthcare. They're in very different languages. There's one on technology. There's all sorts of shifts, did you know? That one happened to be on technology, or on connected worlds. So what is happening in the world in terms of issues facing the world? First of all, there's a power shift. We all know that developing and emerging countries are wielding more economic power in the world. We also are seeing global integration. And when we talk about global integration today, it's not picking up the same organization and putting it in another country. It is leveraging resources differently and functions in different countries. For example, we might have an organization that has marketing in Mexico, accounts payable in Kuala Lumpur, and manufacturing in Canada. So what does that mean for the organizational culture? What does the workplace need to do for that culture? The other thing we're seeing is speed of information and speed of data completely growing exponentially. One of the ways that we test technologies to see if they've been adopted in the world is 1 in 4 Americans has it in their home. Electricity, it took 45 years for that to occur. For the telephone, it was 36 years. For radios, 31 years. The television, 26. PCs, 16. I think you're getting the message here. Mobile telephones, who had a phone like that? 13 years. The internet, 7 years. The iPod, 3 years. Facebook, we all know, 2 years. And then the iTunes Store and iPad and the App Store has had over 10,000 or 10 billion hits already. And I do want to also put a disclaimer. A lot of these facts are outdated just because information changes so rapidly. So what are the effects on organizations? Well, there's 5 key drivers that organizations are facing today. And we're going to talk about innovation for just a couple of minutes. I imagine you guys recognize these units up here. They're MP3 players, right? The middle one's an iPod, came out in the year 2000. You might not know this, but the one on the black one here came from Rio Diamond. It launched in 1998. And then the one on the far side, the blue one, is called Cabo 4. It launched in the year 2000, a few months before iPod came out. When you look at them, they look very similar, same kind of size, same scale, same function. So why is one more prevalent than the other? Well, we would tell you that Apple married the iTunes Store with iPod, and that took that company from a market capitalization of $2.6 billion in the year 2002 to over $300 billion today in market capitalization. So when we talk about innovation, it's not just product innovation, but it's whole market innovation. This is Scott Wilson. He is an industrial designer. He works, has a studio in Chicago called Minimal. And his studio has worked with the likes of Microsoft, Apple, Reebok, Nike. His latest venture has been the Xbox 360 Connect. He was part of that. He wanted to bring this wristband that hosts a nano to market. He had 2 ways to do that. The traditional way was the venture capitalist go and ask people for money. He thought that would take about a year to raise $15,000. The other method was going to Kickstarter. It's an internet site. And he received 13,000 backers, over $900,000 in money in a week's time. So how does this effect work? Well, who in here does not know that you can work anywhere, any place, anytime, right? We all have mobile devices that allows us to take a phone call, to do an email, to do a lot of different things at different times during the day. So we have become untethered from our workplace. I have often heard people talk about the droid in the drawer being the way they get to escape or going on vacation. This is a James Ling-LaSalle survey. In the year 2000, when you asked organizations what the collaboration rate was, they said that 60% of the work they conducted was collaborative. In 2010, they said 80% of the work they did was collaborative. When you talk to CEOs, this is from an IBM CEO survey, when you ask them what kind of collaboration are they doing, they say enterprise collaboration. It's not just one-to-one collaboration, but they're collaborating with organizations outside themselves. And there is a drive to balance lean thinking and processes with the creative white-collar workforce. So are you all familiar with lean manufacturing? Kaizen came about in the 70s. That process is being moved into the office more and more. And the idea is taking waste out of processes, right? Nobody wants to waste time or energy or productivity. At the other side of the coin is more than 50% of US workers today are knowledge workers. So how do you take that waste out? The other piece of information that I find really interesting is the amount of data that's out there. The idea behind this is that the amount of information out there is growing at a very accelerated pace. In fact, the data generated today in the past 2 years is 90% of all of the data out there. And when you look at how much data is being created, you can see that there's not enough space for all of this. In fact, there's a whole summit about how we store this information. The first summit was last year. It was called the Big Data Summit. In 2010, data scientists got together and looked at how much data is out there, how do we store it, what's the security methods, and how do you keep it private. So what does this mean to work? Well, someone has to make it relevant. There's a prevailing theory that comes from a Japanese professor named Nonaka. And in this theory, the thinking is that individuals and organizations have to go through each one of these quadrants. There has to be collaborative, learning, focused, and social connections for knowledge to be created and built. In order to do that, you have to have engaged employees. Now, this is a Gallup poll that recently came out, and over 52% of the employees polled were not engaged with their work. Now, the way we talk about engagement or define engagement is that the worker understands what the job is they need to get done, they're motivated to do it, and that they take action around getting it done. Gensler, which is an architectural and design firm that is worldwide, puts out a study every year. And in their most recent study, what they found is high-performing organizations had engaged employees. Makes sense, right? And they also had higher profit margins than the average organizations. Gensler also looked at the Nonaka theory and found that high-performing organizations, the people within those organizations spent more time in each one of these quadrants, in the socialization and the learning and the collaboration quadrants, than those in average organizations. So we're going to dive down a little bit into that focused portion of the Nonaka theory, and that is how do you get into the flow when you do need to do focused work. There was a book in the 1970s. It's called The Flow, Finding the Flow. Michaeli Csikszentmihalyi, I hope I said that correctly, wrote the book and has since studied it. It's a pretty simple theory that the challenge has to match the skill level. So, for example, if you ask a nuclear scientist to do simple math problems, they might be over in this board. They have the skill level, but they might be bored doing it. If you ask me to build a nuclear reactor, I'm going to be right in this worry or anxiety because I don't have the skill level and I am very challenged by the work. So in order to have work done, people need to be engaged and they need to be in a flow where they have a balance between skill and challenge. Now let's talk about the workers that are in the workplace today. So where did they go? Today we are untethered from our desks. I heard this saying the other day and I really like it, that work is an activity, it's not necessarily a place. And if you think of it like that, work can be done anywhere. Have you heard the term called the third place? The first place would be your home, the second place would be your office, and the third place is someplace where people gather. It's typically a public space. It can be a cafe, it can be a coffee shop, it can be a library. But we're seeing more and more people collaborate in those spaces. At Steelcase, we work with an organization down in Arizona, and it's a 400-person facility. 400 people use that facility. They have card swipes. When they built it for 400 people. So there are offices and cubicles for all of those people. When they look at the reports from the card swipes, what they see is there's only 12 days a month that building is fully utilized. So where are they all going? We all know that it's multicultural, multi-generational in the workplace today. You're finding people with different backgrounds, different skill levels, and different, almost different languages as well because of the globalization. That means that there's going to be different expectations that individuals bring to the workplace. For example, baby boomers had the expectation that work was 9 to 5 and that when you left work, you had social time. Then the Gen Xers came in and they really defined that time and said, I'm going to make sure that I get to go see my children's soccer games. I'm going to make sure I have balance between work and life. We're seeing those lines getting very blurred with the Gen Y generation. Because technology has been part of their life since they've been growing up, it's incumbent on them that they can change from one to the next without really thinking about it. So the trick is to know when work ends and social begins, and the vice versa. Networks aren't new. Networks have been around for a long time. The internet has really expanded the amount of networks that are out there. A great example is my father. When he worked, he was probably maybe 3 or 4 networks, really. He had his work network, he had the family, there was the community, and I'm sure he was part of a business network, although I don't know that. When I look at my children who aren't working full-time, they have at a minimum 20 networks that they're a part of. Part of that is all of the things going on in their lives, and then the internet just kicks it up a notch, if you will. What that means to organizations and to work is that you're vying for that employee or that worker's attention. That in the past you had more attention coming from that employee than you might have today. So does this mean that the workplace is going to go away? What does it mean the workplace will be like in the future? We don't think so. We think the workplace is going to stay around, and we think it's going to work harder and be smarter than it's ever been. But we think it's going to change. I often ask the question, does physical space have an influence on space and behavior and culture? And at Steelcase, we believe it does. We believe it influences those things. We have done over 100 surveys with different organizations in different industries across the world. And what tends to bubble up are these 4 issues that are facing the workplace today. And the first is real estate value. How is that real estate being utilized? The second is collaboration. Are there places where people can come together and collaborate? And the third is attracting and engaging. In the past, you would have heard attract and retain. That's really changed and around how do we get people that are in the workplace engaged in what they're doing. And then the last is building a place that reflects both the company or the organization goals, their values, and culture, and makes that brand recognizable to the external audiences and internal audiences. So let's talk a little bit about real estate. HOK, another architectural and design firm who does a lot of different types of buildings, will tell you that today the common size for a cubicle or a workspace is somewhere in between 48 square feet and 64 square feet. So that's an 8 by 8 or a 6 by 8. And they will also say that that space is shrinking, that it's getting smaller. The next thing that we're starting to see is that as those workstations get smaller, organizations are looking to put more common spaces together, what we call we spaces, places where you can come, have that quick collaboration, exchange information, maybe create knowledge, and then move on very quickly. We're also seeing at the start of alternate work strategies. And this isn't a new concept, but in 2008, this survey comes from Cornet, which is a commercial building organization. And in 2008, or 2009, I'm sorry, 69% of their respondents said that they were moving to alternative work strategies. The reasons they said they were doing it was cost, productivity, and attracting and retaining individuals. The types of alternate work strategies that they are using are home offices is the first, hoteling, where you might have a smaller space in your office and then another place to work, so you're not in one seat all day, you're at various seats throughout the day, and then mobile work. Here are the top 3 reasons, and we've added some others. So how can the workplace help people connect? Well, a recent Business Week article, 82% of the respondents said that they needed more places to collaborate. When Steelcase did our own survey of over 23,000 employees, we found that the reason people go to the workplace is to connect to information, to connect to each other, to connect to the organization, and to use the big tools. So how does the workplace do all of those things and meet varying expectations? First of all, we believe that it should have a range of settings, and it depends on the organization. But your range of settings might be an individual workspace, individual space for focused work, and maybe adjoining it is someplace where we can sit down and meet very quickly or collaborate. We also think information needs to be shared very easily and democratically. So how easy is it for you to change technology users? And lastly, we think collaboration is happening on a larger scale than just a small smartphone or a small tablet. Now, I've used the word collaboration. Has anybody counted? We could do that bingo game. I've used it a lot without defining it. We look at collaboration really being broken down into three kinds of parts. The first is informative, and that's basically what I'm doing today. I'm informing you of some information that we've pulled together. It's more about pushing information out. The second is evaluative. That's more analyzing the information, critiquing it, working to maybe dissect the information. And the third is generative, and that's where innovation happens. And generative is where you take an idea, I add on to it, and we start layering. So how does that happen in the workplace today? That's the question. You guys got the answers? The next piece that's really affecting organizations is the baby boomers leaving. Now, this is a statistic that came out 2008. It came from the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics. I wish I could speak. 10,000 baby boomers leaving the workplace every single day. I might have dropped off in 2008 when the economy kind of fell off of a cliff. But oddly enough, we are hearing from different sources that that is a huge issue for them. We work with a preeminent lab in the Midwest, and they are finding that they have what they call brain drain. They have knowledge workers walking out the door 26 a day. And their problem is they're not able to backfill with younger workers. A couple of reasons: the skill level, and the second reason they would tell you is look around. Do you see a Gen Y wanting to work in this space? So we have some tools that can help. We can talk about workplace satisfaction, we can talk about collaboration, and then we believe that in order to attract and retain and share knowledge, that the workers need to have control and choice over where they work. So we believe it is easier, it is important, and your space can work harder than it did before. This is a tool that just is an example of some of the tools that we have in our portfolio. And what this does, and I'm sorry I don't have it live, but what this does is it takes your idea from what's happening today and looking at the culture that you want to provide, the processes that you're implementing, the technology that's available to you and your workers. You can go along this spectrum and click on it, and what happens is it changes the whole dynamic. So you can start to see, if you change your individual workspace, what happens to the larger portion. And I'd be happy to share some more of that if you'd like. Do you guys have questions, comments? The question was, when you have collaborative space adjacent to other group work, how do you alleviate the noise? What are some of those things? And there is a tension between where does that collaboration space happen compared to where the heads down focus work is. Oftentimes we're seeing floor plates change so that the public space is more towards the front, and as you get closer or more dense into the facility, the more focused work comes together, so that there's an actual thought process about where people might be doing what activity. Today, that may not be happening with the changes going on. The other thing that we found is that oftentimes if you're in walls or have high panels, you talk as if you're in a private room. And when you bring those panels down and you see other people around you, you tend to bring your voice down and maybe seek another private place to go have that conversation where you need to speak louder. That's it. And the perception is unhappy workers because of noise, transference, and people working different hours and working in cubicles. And I think that there is a friction between how work has been done traditionally and how work is being done today. Now, just because someone has headphones on, does that mean that they are avoiding sound, or maybe they're doing focused work and getting to that optimal flow? That's a question I have to ask you. And what the experts would say is it probably depends on your point of view on what you need to hear. My children, when they do their homework today, they listen to the radio, they have their smartphone with them, and the TV is probably blasting in the background. They want more stimuli than I ever did. So it's kind of a different on the degree scale. So there's going to be a friction, and that's what we're living through today. That's absolutely true. I've read that same thing, that your brain really can only do one thing at a time, and when you think you're multitasking, you're making mistakes.
Right. So
yes.
Adding the music.
The thinking is that you need to separate where that focus work happens compared to that collaboration work. I would tell you that one of the reasons that organizations are moving to alternate work strategies is to save on real estate, the efficiency of real estate. Because if you shrink spaces here and maybe make smaller or joint spaces here that are more shared, you get savings in terms of real estate. And real estate is the second cost typically an organization has to labor, correct? We talk about a palliative place, that maybe not everybody has a set space. So that organization I was talking about in Phoenix that has 400 people, maybe they set it up so it can handle 400 people, but it's not all assigned seating. Maybe I come in for that meeting and I'm sitting in a different place. Or maybe I sit in one chair for 15 minutes and another chair in another location for another 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. There's a whole study about where that individual worker goes to collaborate. In fact, there's this whole industry being built up. It came from venture capitalist housing collaborations and then coffee shops being able to do it. There's a couple of groups that are looking at memberships to like a liquid space. So you go into a collaborative space and what does that look like? And there's maybe tiered activities around that. So we're seeing that around the country. It's huge in Northern California right now. And there's a couple places in Denver that actually offer that today.
There's a couple of them.
I think in the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to see huge changes. And I think that there will be levels, kind of, there's a techie level. Today, there's like a techie level, what I would call a techie level. That's not a specific term, let's not coin it. And a more corporate level, and somewhere in between. Mm-hmm.
Do you see with the kind of, I guess, alternative work strategies, do you see a tension at all between that and a loss of face-to-face collaboration? Is there a kind of quantifiable value to face-to-face collaboration versus I'm on the phone or I'm doing a web chat or online forum with someone?
Yes, and it probably depends on the industry and the organization and their values, what that quantifiable value is. You look at organizations, we work with a consulting firm that a few years ago, or actually in the early 90s, they went to total hoteling and total mobile work. And what happened with that organization is they lost a huge number of employees because those people would be working at a client site and felt more engaged with that client than they did their own organization. So they've come back and looked at that and built different spaces. They expanded the real estate somewhat, not hugely. The other thing that happened with that organization is now they have more Gen Ys than boomers, and so people come into work, they're used to going someplace, much like a college campus, going someplace to meet and exchange ideas. So it's very easy for them to do. But they did kind of pull back a little bit and pull in things like a weekly meeting when everybody has to be there, and building in activities so that you go through those 4 quadrants of the Nokia.
Yes. How do you encourage people to look at their space differently? For example, the traditional thing would be, oh, the bigger the office, the more prestige, the closed door. That, how do you approach that? Because I would think that's probably an issue in many places. That, well, I still want the big office with the door, so I feel important.
Hierarchy is an issue, and I don't know that it's ever going to change. And I am not advocating that you don't need doors or you don't need private offices. There are some places that absolutely need that privacy. what we talk about is how much is that space being used and how many people are able to use it. And that's really how the conversation gets started, is how often are you using that 200 square foot office, and what type of use is it being used for?
Well, I'm going to go back to the cubicle life question, because I have a term called cubicular conversations. And a cubicular conversation is much different than one in privacy. But where I work, there's a lot of people that do conference calls, not all day long, but a conference call could last an hour and a half, and they're back and forth talking.
Oftentimes we see organizations using smaller spaces and not dedicating them to offices, but dedicating them to people that need to speak loudly or do a video conference or a conference call. The trick is getting that ratio correct, and I don't know what that ratio is right off the top of my head. The other trick is to see how many of those employees actually do those calls in the office or other places because of the sound and some of the stuff that goes on in the office. Well, thank you.